Greetings, fellow seekers of the mysterious. This is Paranormal M, your gateway to the unexplained. Subscribe and hit that notification bell to embark on a journey through our latest perplexing tales. We hope you're prepared for a mind-boggling experience. Random encounter whilst walking to the pub. It was early autumn in 1999, and I was camping with friends in the West Country. There were about 6 of us. We had set up our tents alongside a little stream, but decided we'd walk the mile or so to the local village to have dinner at a local pub. It was a beautiful evening, roughly 6 p.m., still bright daylight and still warm, mid-20 centigrade. We were walking down the country lane with hedgerows and pastures beyond them on either side of us. I was walking with my friend Dave, chatting about whatever. We're at the head of a group, with the rest a few meters behind us. Dave's on my left, and as we're walking and talking, we come to a metal gate, also on the left, leading into a field. There's this farmer leaning against the gate with a genial smile on his face. He looks friendly and, to be honest, harmless, maybe in his 50s or early 60s. But what struck me the most was what he was wearing. He had on a rough cotton or maybe woolen dark brown trouser, an old-style white cotton shirt, and an old scruffy black waistcoat. Sees me staring, and as we draw abreast, he says, "Evening." I reply. David looks at me and then looks to our left. In the meantime, the farmer said something about the weather, and I replied that it's perfect for camping. We don't stop walking or slow our already slow pace, and once a few meters away, turn to Dave and say, "Did you see what he was wearing? Like it was from the 1940s or something." Dave turned to me with a confused look on his face. Who were you just talking to?" I turned a gesture to the farmer, but he's not there. And judging by the rest of the group behind us, who just passed the gate themselves, nobody else saw or interacted with the farmer. The house in St. Nicholas Road. I've had various experiences through my life that I can't logically explain. But today I'm going to tell you about the house my parents bought when I was in my teens. This isn't about one encounter like most of my other posts, but rather a number of the more memorable things that happened to me in this house. This is in the UK. I don't know how many of the details on how my parents acquired a large Victorian 3-story house in St. Nicholas Road. What I do know is that a builder had bought it and was converting it to apartments, and he ran out of money. So the bank foreclosed, and somehow my parents acquired it for much cheaper. But it was a building site. The builder hadn't done much to the ground floor, but the other 2 floors were pretty much just shells. Structurally, the house was absolutely fine. It dated from around the 1880s. My dad asked me if I'd stay there so that people could see it was occupied, so that people wouldn't break in or squat. I set myself up in the main living area with a camp bed, and all was good. I had electricity and hot water, and despite its condition, the house was sealed from the weather. My first few experiences were hearing doors being opened and closed in other rooms. Of course, when I got there, I wouldn't find anybody or anything untoward, or indeed any reason for the doors to just magically open or close. These were proper old wooden doors, and not likely to move in a drought. Not that there were any droughts in any case, but the builder had replaced all the old window frames with good quality UPVC frame double glazing. The sounds of doors opening and closing when I was alone in the house became a common thing in my 3 years of living there. After my parents had put right all the builder's work, decorated, and the rest of the family moved in, my parents, my sisters, and briefly my brother until he got a place with his girlfriend, I ended up having the top floor to myself. The house had 6 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms and the family bathroom on the first floor, and 2 bedrooms and a sort of kitchenette area on the second floor, the top floor, my floor. One room faced the street. It was a bit noisy due to the traffic outside. The other overlooked the back of the house and was much quieter. I set myself up in the back bedroom, but would soon be woken regularly by an animal panting next to my head. Found out after a while that the last occupant was an old man who had a German Shepherd dog. Another thing I often heard in that room was creaking wood and a rustling noise like paper. I figured that someone used to have a creaky wooden chair or a rocking chair and read the newspaper here. I tried moving to the front bedroom, but the noise of the traffic was too much in the summer with the window open. Having it closed made the room unbearably hot and stuffy. So I soon moved back into the back bedroom and talked to the room about the dog waking me up, and to please try to keep him quiet. I was still woken occasionally by panting noises, but it was a lot less frequently. One of the weirder things that started happening I actually wasn't aware of until about 2 years of living there. I had started slowly to build it up over time. It was only when I moved out that I realized what was happening. I started to hear voices, several, like there was a group of people in the room with me. They were having a conversation or a quiet get-together. I don't know why, but to this day, whenever I think about this, I picture them in a 1930s style. But I have really nothing to base this on that I'm aware of. It would be a couple of words, a snatch of conversation, usually male, but not always, and background noise, like glasses clinking and a record player or similar party-style noises, and laughter. I would often just hear good-natured laughter with men's voices. I talked to my dad about this because it was becoming a weekly thing, and I honestly began to wonder if I was just going a bit mad. He told me he hadn't heard voices, but did admit that he had other things happen to him that didn't happen to me. I might include that I'll include those a little later on, I guess. It was only when I moved out and into my new place that I realized after a couple of weeks that I hadn't heard any of the voices. The realization made me laugh with joy. I wasn't losing my marbles after all. As a postscript to this paragraph, I have to recount how I stayed at the house in 2002, after my dad died and helped my mom. The first night there, I heard the voice again. It startled me, but they were old friends, and I knew by then that I was mentally okay. So the ground floor was made up of 2 main living areas, the large kitchen and the laundry room in the very back of the house, a room that had been converted into a shower room or a toilet. I have no idea what the room was prior to the conversion. I was in the kitchen one day, and I think it was a Saturday, and I clearly heard a young female voice say, "The potatoes from the Crescent aren't as good as they used to be." The Crescent is a local high street in the area, about a 5-minute walk from the house. The voice was clear as crystal, came from the adjoining laundry room. I dashed in there, but of course there's nobody there, and I stick my head in the shower and toilet room, but that's empty too. So I'm just alone in the house. This one is a tale my sister told me. Her and her boyfriend of the time had rolled in from the pub late one Saturday night and were just in the kitchen unpacking takeaways and just grabbed on their way home. When her boyfriend casually says to her, "Oh, I didn't know you had your grandmother staying with you." Sister gave him a weird look and said, "Both my grannies are dead." To which he replied, "Then who the fuck is that?" They both look into the hallway and there's nothing there. Boyfriend squealed and screamed and ran to the laundry. Once he calmed down, he told my sister how he'd heard someone go shh at him. He turned toward the noise and there was a white-haired old lady looking over the banister of the staircase in the hallway, scowling at him, like they had woken her up. My dad was as much a skeptic of the paranormal as I am, or was, and admitted that to me, a few strange things had happened to him. He told me of when he was preparing food in the kitchen one time and put a utensil he was using down on the countertop, only to reach for it again 20 seconds later and had it be gone. He looked on the floor and started looking elsewhere, trying to figure out where it had gone. He found it in a mug of water in the sink. Knew for a fact that he didn't put it there. Another one he told me was I guess he was just reading or doing paperwork at the dinner table in one of the living areas when the door slammed shut, which startled him out of the conversation. He looked up to see the handle turned down and the door opened fully again, but there was nobody on the other side of the door. These are the most of my more memorable things I remember of the 3 years on St. Nicholas Road. My mom sold the house in 2004-05, and she downsized. The Case of the Missing Mobile Phone. This is back in 2006-2007 in the UK. I had bought a house with my girlfriend of the time, just as the ass fell out of the housing market. If we had waited 6 months, we could have saved ourselves $50,000 at least. The house was an ex-council property built in the 70s. It was all right. Needed some minor work done to it, but that's all. The girlfriend and I moved in straight away without drama. However, after a couple of weeks, we noticed things would go missing only to reappear after a few days on the second to bottom step of the stairs, the one that goes up to the first floor where the bedrooms and the family bathroom were located. Usually it was kitchen implements, and I always got the blame as the girlfriend didn't believe in ghosts. I'm undecided from a logical point of view. Can't grasp the concept, but I've experienced too much weird shit to be a total non-believer. Anyway, I digress. This became the standard state of play for about 12 months. Something would disappear, she'd get a stop at me, and I'd quietly ask the house to please return the item because I'm in the shit again. And she'd withhold sex, which she's annoyed at me, and the item would reappear a few days later, and then all would be well for a month or 6 weeks until something else disappears. Rinse and repeat. Also, it was almost always the girlfriend who found the item, as she usually got home from work before me. And then one day her phone disappeared. This is back in 2006. Remember, mobile phones were nothing like the supercomputers they are now. It was usually in her pocket or in her bag, and she couldn't understand where it went. We searched everywhere. It was switched on, so we tried calling it, but couldn't hear ringing, even though it was doing so on my end. Batteries on phones back then used to last forever too, by the way. Of course, it was my fault. I quietly pleaded to the house to return the phone, but as usual, I was ignored. It was a Saturday morning when it reappeared. For whatever reason, the girlfriend was up before me and had gone down for brekkie and put the kettle on. I heard her go, "Oh!" and come back upstairs, immediately clutching her phone. "Why did you put it on the step?" she asked me. I explained for the 100th time that it's not me doing it. We look at her phone, full battery, unusual. It's been missing for, I think, 5 days, and dozens of missed calls from my mobile and her office number, and one outgoing call made. We tried redialing it, but it was a dead line. This is the part that kind of fucked me up the most. It wasn't the last thing to disappear before we sold the house in 2010, but it was definitely the most memorable. A room I wouldn't go in. My family and I moved into a new house my senior year of high school. My room was in the basement. My room in the last house was in the basement, so it was no big deal for me. There was another room next to mine that could have been another bedroom, but everybody else decided to stay upstairs. My family put our piano in that room and used the closet as extra storage space. Every time I would walk past that room, I was filled with an inexplicable dread. It's a feeling I still can't describe properly. I always felt like there was something on the other side of the door that was just waiting for me to open it. If I would walk by that room and the door was open, I would walk up and shut it immediately, being sure not to look inside. No other room in the house or any other house I've lived in has given me this feeling. I felt a presence that was extremely negative in that room. It came to the point where every time I went to my room, which shared a wall with that room, I felt uneasy, watched, unsafe, and overall very negative. I would have written it off as to me being paranoid or anxious about moving into a new house, after living in the same one most of my life. However, I wasn't the only one who expressed these feelings. The woman who cleaned our house refused to clean that room one day. When my mom asked her why, she said that room had an extremely dark energy. I wish I knew what was going on in that house. Items would disappear, reappear, and lights would turn on, and especially when I was sure they were off. Doors would be open and I'd be sure that they were closed, etc., etc. I won't ever go back into that house. My family moved after about 2 years. heard someone calling my name in the middle of the night. So a little backstory. This happened on Sunday around 2:30 or 3 a.m. I work nights mostly, so I'm usually up at night. I was the only one awake in my household at the time, and I live in an apartment complex. I was crouched in the doorway to my balcony at the time, petting my rabbit because he wanted some lovin'. And I let him free roam on the balcony. It's pretty much cemented, no railings or holes at all. So anyways, as I said, I was crouched. And since there isn't any railing, no one would be able to see me. And even if they could, there's a giant tree that covers half my balcony. The light was off since it was so late at night. That being said, I heard a giggle and then my name being called. It was being called in a coaxing kind of way, like someone trying to get you to come over. Sort of dragged out like, insert name, insert name, insert name. Just plead your name. That makes sense. I stood and looked around at the other balconies and then the ground floor and didn't see a single person. I then thought I might have called somebody by accident because the voice almost sounded like a friend of mine. So maybe I just had him on my phone. So I closed the door, checked, but I hadn't. The moment I closed the door, I heard the voice say my name one last time in an angry tone, and then silence. I haven't really heard it since, thankfully. Told my sister, who then sprinkled salt in the doorways and told whatever it was that it wasn't welcome in the morning, in case it was a spirit, I guess. I really can't explain it. Had a lot of paranormal-like experiences in my life, including always feeling like someone's watching me at night and hearing noises when I'm home alone since I was young. But I've never outright heard my name being called like that. I think the graveyard by my house is haunted. I live less than a half of a mile away from a densely wooded area with an 1800s-era graveyard, which I frequently go to, mainly looking for mushrooms and reptiles and such. But the past few times I've been, the very last time I went, have been exceptionally strange. I'll start with the most interesting thing that happened first. I had gone to this graveyard roughly around 2 p.m. Again, looking for mushrooms. I was roughly 400 feet into the woods, much past the graveyard, which is only about 20 or 30 feet from the entrance to the woods. But I decided to head back to my house. So I began to walk back toward the way that I'd entered when I started to get the feeling that I was being watched. Now, being in the woods, that's quite a normal thing. It usually just ends up being a deer or an owl or something. However, I quickly realized it probably wasn't. When I finally got back to the area of the graveyard, the woods went dead silent, which isn't a good thing. So I ran pretty quickly out of the woods. The moment I stepped out of the woods, I looked to the right of me and I saw a trail that I hadn't before. So I decided to, quite stupidly, go into the trail to see what was back there. There wasn't much, just rusted cans and trash everywhere. I'd stood back in this area where the short trail took me when I heard a very strange sound. It sounded almost like a frog, but very high-pitched and almost tonal, like someone singing. Made the hair stand up on the back of my neck, and at this point I sprinted out of the woods until I was nearly back to my neighborhood and I looked back. When I did, there were 3 small orbs that seemed to stare back at me. At that moment I just said to myself, "Oh, fuck this." Ran out as fast as I could back to my neighborhood. The only other strange thing to happen back there is the Sasquatch trees, which are bent-over trees that I know for certain that no human could have bent. Trees back there are over 20 feet in height, quite sturdy. And the time where I was back in the graveyard with my mother, we both heard a distinctive whoop, like the stereotypical sound you hear in Bigfoot documentaries. It's quite strange. That was a terrible rendition on my part. I have photos of the graveyard and the Sasquatch trees, but I think I'll wait until people say they'd like to see them on posts. I'm on my mobile right now and links are difficult to get. UFO sighting above Green Cove Springs, Florida. It was the summer of 2016, a few months after my sister was born, and me and my family had some old family friends over at our house. We had been hanging out nearly all day. It was beginning to get around the time of sunset. Me and my friend, which I'll refer to as Adam, went on a walk down to the ponds in my neighborhood. Stayed there for what I remember being about 30 or 45 minutes. Just enough time for it to become dark enough to see the stars. At this point, we began the short walk back to my house, and I notice a star in the sky which appears to be moving. I tell Adam this, and he says that he too can see it. At this point, we're standing at the end of my driveway looking up at the sky. We watched the quote-unquote star for roughly 5 minutes when we noticed 2 other stars, all of which are moving toward each other around the same speed. Now this is where it begins to get really weird. Adam pulls out his phone and attempts to record it, but it ends up being too dimly lit for his phone's camera to see it, sadly. Nearly immediately after Adam had put his phone away, all the stars had stopped in a blank patch of sky, devoid of all other light and stars, and formed a large triangle. The stars then began moving as one unit and turning clockwise in the sky. They remained in this formation and movement for nearly 5 minutes before stopping, then proceeded to move at a speed which I've never seen before, away from each other and disappearing into the night. Both me and Adam were both visibly shook up. Based on the reaction of the people at home when we tried to explain what happened to them, they shrugged it off and, well, they just thought we didn't know what we saw. I know what I saw, so does Adam. Green Cove Springs has a history of military and government establishments and compounds, none of which are currently active. However, there's a significant amount of military infrastructure still in use as housing and places of business. Makes me wonder if this had something to do with that sort of test flight. The thing that follows me. A pitch-black humanoid figure wearing neat clothes and hair by the seams. I can't see detail beside the outline. He's about 6 feet tall. Not the only one to have seen it. First time was when I was like 5 or so. I saw the figure very clearly walking toward me down the hall at my grandmother's house interstate. And after I froze, I ran off and it disappeared. But I don't know if it's because I was a kid or what, but it gave me a very bad feeling. Then again, when I was about 12, I was looking out my back window into the paddock behind my house. The figure was walking horizontally to me, and then turned and continued walking, but toward me. Stared for a second with the same scared feeling and then went to run off. But after a couple of steps, I decided to stop and look back, and it was gone. Those are my 2 major experiences that I know wasn't just me seeing things because I watched it clearly. I've also found that my mother had seen it standing behind me while I was on the couch, and it promptly disappeared. Turns out my mom's old friend saw the same thing happen. A black human-like figure behind me and just disappear. This was on a separate occasion, and she didn't know about the possibility of it being something following me. So I'm not the only person to have seen the figure. It gives me a bad feeling, but that could just be because I'm seeing something or what. But my mom reckons it's this ghost named Gary that we've encountered when I was a newborn. And it was following me. Woke Mom up in time for my appointment, and I told her his name. But he was good, and this doesn't feel like it. I've had other occasions where I think it's around because I get the same feeling, scared and weirdly aware of what's around me. As I've gotten older and moved, it seems to be less apparent, but I still have occasions where I think it might just be me catching a glimpse or a feeling of his presence. One last visit from Uncle P. I don't know if, like me, you have a big family. My Nan had 8 children, and she herself had many siblings, one of which was my great-uncle P. Uncle P was my mom's favorite uncle, but now he was in his 90s, but happy and living life to the full still. I had met him as a child, of course, but living in different cities meant that I grew up and I heard a lot about him but never actually saw him. Mom said that Uncle P always asked about me. He wasn't too bothered about the others because I think I was always fascinated by him. And when he called my mom, I would always butt in and say hi and ask after him. Sadly, recently he passed. But the months leading up to his sudden death, I had a heavy feeling. Me and Mom would talk about going to see him, but work and things would always get in the way. But I felt very strongly about needing to kind of meet him as an adult. So we made the trip. Previously, we had tried to meet up with him, but things always got in the way, like his illness or just last-minute cancellations. He opened the door and straight away pulled me in for a hug, saying that this would be the one that I've been waiting for. Spent the next few hours laughing and talking about his life and our joint interest for the paranormal. He told me many of his own stories and encounters, including the significance of white feathers. As I left, he had tears in his eyes and he said to me, "You were exactly as I hoped you would be and more." Wanted to show me an old picture he'd loved, but as he pulled it out from behind his dusty cabinet, a white feather floated down to the floor. We both laughed out in shock and amusement. A couple of months after, he had passed away due to sudden sepsis. So I was visiting my mom shortly after the death, and I was outside in the back garden having a smoke on my own. An overwhelming feeling came over me, like nostalgia. I felt happy but sad as Uncle P popped into my head. Went back inside and closed the door but froze. And there it was, a white feather stuck to the door handle. The handle side that's actually inside the house. And let me tell you now, it was not there before I walked out. And trust me, I would have noticed. You couldn't miss it. My mom would never have stuck it there. The Redhead Man. I used to dance. We practiced in studio on the top floor of an old theater. I was about 12 years old, and it was me and my best friend at the time that would go every Saturday together. We arrived late one Saturday, usually at the bottom of the stairs. You pay, but there was no one there. We thought we must have been really late, so we run up to the 2 flights of the doors at the top that enters the cloakroom. But as we got there, we just saw darkness through the small windows. I peered in, seeing nothing but black, and looked back to my friend who shrugged, but suddenly her eyes widened as she gazed upon my shoulder. I followed her gaze back to the window where I locked my eyes onto a man. He had red and his eyes were wide. Red hair, wide eyes, piercing green. He was somewhat see-through, like what I'd imagine a mirage in my mind would be like. I felt like I couldn't look away, but my logical brain took over and I searched for a poster or something that he may have been reflecting from. There was nothing. I looked back and he blinked. I heard the rush of frantic footsteps starting down the steps as I realized I had been left alone and my friend had escaped. I took one last look at the man who at this point, I swear, had grown a smirk in the corner of his mouth. And that done it, I followed suit. My heart was trying to break out of my chest as I sped after my friend. We didn't stop running until we were outside in the light and warmth. I said to her, What did you see?" And she said, "A man, I think." You see, it was different to looking through a window and seeing an actual person. This guy was faded. It was like a projection. We rang our parents from a payphone and asked them to come get us as soon as possible. We later found that the dance training was canceled that week, but we both didn't get the memo. We lost contact after a few years, but we still follow each other on social media. One night, my curiosity got the better of me, and I messaged her, just asking if she remembered what happened that day or if it was just a cause of my childhood imagination. She confirmed that she still had the image of the redhead man burned into her memory. Every time I think about him, I feel a chill. I actually wish I would have stayed longer, but I shudder what would have happened if I had opened that door. The crying woman followed me home. Since I was 11, I used to hang out with my little sister, my childhood best friend, in this abandoned manor. Our parents didn't want us to go there because it said that the place is used for satanic rituals. I didn't believe in the existence of Satan and things like that, so we kept going to that manor. At 12, I started to feel depressed. Long story short, I was severely bullied and my parents were in continuous fights. I hated being home and I started to go at the manor alone and just with Vicky, my female Doberman. That place started feeling like home and I started to study there, to draw or simply relax while the dog explored the little wood that still surrounded the manor and the castle nearby. Before believing in the paranormal in that manor, I experienced things. Those two are the more interesting. In the manor's hall, there's a chair. Sometimes we sat down at the main entrance with the chair on the other side of the hall, and a moment later it would be near us. I never got scared, and knowing that, we weren't the only kids going there, I thought the chair was already near us and we were just used to seeing it at the other side of the room, so I just didn't acknowledge it sooner. Nothing paranormal, right? Even when we clearly saw the chair in one place and a moment later it would be near us, I kept believing it was already there and we didn't see it, kind of a thing. I often heard a woman crying. Being a skeptic, I used to think I was imagining it, but a few times, they all heard it too. I always left the place with them because I was the older one. One was 3 years younger than me and my sister 6 years younger than me. Thought it was some, like a human stranger. I wanted them to be safe. Even alone, I heard the cry and my dog always tried to go toward the chair, waggling his tail and basically doing the same thing she used to do when I cried. I kept believing in the presence of a homeless or just weird woman, and I would just go home for safety. After a while, I just ignored the cry and stayed in the manor. I started to believe when I was 13 or 14 years old. I was at the manor with Vicky and I heard 3 knocks on the 3rd floor. The place is surrounded by trees, so I thought about some animal dropping something. There were a lot of squirrels and it was maybe a possible explanation. After a few minutes, 3 knocks on the 2nd floor nearer. Kept going like this and the knocks were coming toward me. My dog started growling aggressively. I know I should have run away, but I was curious and stayed there until the knocks were coming by my side. Only then I ran away, and after doing my research and learning that the 3 knocks mean that a demon is being disrespectful toward the Holy Trinity, well, even as an atheist, I didn't go to the manor for almost a year. After that day, I started to notice more things. Weird noises, objects moving 90% of the time. I explained it logically, but I was unable to rationalize the things that started to happen when I was 15. I just restarted going to the manor. Always with someone and never inside the manor now. So me and my 2 friends started to see something weird in my garden. It was like a black human silhouette. My father saw that too. I stopped my visits to the manor once again when I saw that figure in my home. Sulfur smell in the bedrooms. Something knocked inside my sister's side of her wardrobe, giving her nightmares. We share a room to this day, and she said the noises stopped when I was away from home. Now something knocked over my clothes and knocks inside my side of the wardrobe. We do have 13 cats, but every time I heard something, I never find a cat inside the wardrobe. Me and other people saw a young woman crying at the window of the manor before vanishing into thin air. Something chased me the first and only time I visited manor alone at 18 years old. I once created a story of that manor. I always felt a female presence. I call her Elise. Always near that chair, and a male presence. I call him Lord in one room. So I wrote a story about a young woman who was married to a traveler. They loved each other so much that she killed herself when he was murdered while traveling to Germany. My mother told me that it's what happened to a couple that lived in the manor decades ago. Never heard that story before. My friend James saw the crying woman while visiting the manor with friends. They begged me to come there because I know the place like the back of my hand, and I found them scared as hell. I told them not to enter Lord's room. One of them never listened. I'm able to enter the room without problems, but strangers always feel bad or sick. This guy vomited and had a bad fever shortly after being in the room. I started feeling really affectionate toward the crying woman. I feel like crying whenever I think about her. My sister said to me this morning that she saw a woman sitting on my bed. I never told her that I feel someone sitting on my bed at night because I always thought I was imagining it. I don't know what to do, people. I don't know what logical explanation I could give for those things and what to do in general. I feel like I should help Elise and my friend Jane. She's a sensitive and a green witch. Said to me that the tarot say that there's a ghost who needs company. Do you have any advice? Some logical explanation? Should I believe? Paranormal activity in my house during middle school. Some background information about my house. My house currently is over 100 years old. As a kid, I was also so scared and afraid of the dark. I scared easily, and usually when I'm home alone, I would leave on all the lights and leave on the TV so I don't feel alone and scared. I'm not 100% sure if someone's dialed in the house, but whenever I was alone, or at night especially, I always had a feeling like I was being watched, like someone was staring at me. This event took place in middle school for me. I was up late because I was the type of kid that never does his homework when he gets home, always waits till the last minute. And that is usually past my bedtime, which is 10 p.m., but this time I had an essay due in the morning, so I was up working on my essay that I needed to hand in that next day. My mom recently just went to bed, and the rest of my family been in bed since 10 p.m., and it's only me on the dining room table working on the essay, just a little past midnight. Could be closer to 1, but I'm not 100% sure. As I'm working on my essay, I start to hear a little rattling noise coming from the backyard door. It seems like it was the doorknob. Someone or something was playing with the doorknob and making it rattle. I was very scared, but this essay was more important. I had to get it done, so I just continued to write my essay. As the sound starts to crescendo slowly and get ever so louder, I start to panic a little and go check it out. Not fully check it out, but just enough to see the door and see what's making the sound. A little layout of my house so you can understand how it was positioned. From the dining room table where I was sitting in the kitchen, the sink was about 8 feet away. The kitchen was almost like a small hallway with an island counter and shelves on one side, and the other side was like a sink and a fridge and a stove and a little kitchen counter. Down the end of the hallway is where my backyard door was. I just peeped my head just opposite the kitchen sink and at the end of the island counter where I could have a good view of the back door. And from what I could see, the doorknob wasn't moving at all from what I could see, but possibly the outside doorknob. Because I knew the sound of the doorknob moving, someone or something was shaking or rattling the doorknob from the outside. I left it alone, still scared at this point. I go back to working on my essay. The rattling and shaking of the doorknob is not stopping, and slowly getting louder as I continue to work. Maybe about 5 minutes since I started hearing the doorknob shaking, and I'm really scared at this point. So I decided to go to bed and wake up early tomorrow and work on my essay. So I turned off the lights, went straight to bed. A mere 5 minutes has probably passed since I turned the lights and went to bed, and I'm laying in bed thinking about what just happened, and I need to write the next essay. I realized I didn't hear the doorknob rattling anymore. It suddenly stopped. So I decided to get back up, because I had to finish this essay and I'm wide awake still. So I turned on the light and continued to work on my essay, and not even a minute's passed since I turned the light on that the doorknob's shaking very intensely and violently all of a sudden. The loudest I'd ever heard it. That was this night, and I was even more scared and turned off the lights and went straight to bed. She was left to die. I live in the UK and come from a town that was first settled by Romans For context, it's a very historical area. When I was a child, I lived in a house built in the early 1800s. The whole street was built to the house of fishermen of the time. Before that, I understand it was farmland. It was from 4 years of age I would start getting these dreams of someone in a wheelchair, deformed and tormenting me. It was a nightly occurrence and made me cry and shriek for my brother. It soon ended after a couple of years. However, this is when I started to see things while I was awake. One of them really did make me freeze every time without fail. It started when I was lying in my bottom bunk bed and I'd turn over and look to see the other side of the room. Two cat heads fighting to get past each other near a bookshelf. This happened often and I'd shrug it off eventually. But one night I'll never forget the first time I saw the lady lying on my bedroom floor right next to the same bookshelf, absolutely motionless. No movement, nothing. I was too scared to move the first few times I encountered her. I eventually plucked the courage to stand up and properly look. She looked weathered, wearing a drab and beaten-looking dress and a robe and hair wild and untamed. I could make out much of the face, but it looked just empty. I would turn on the light and she would be gone. The moment I turned it back off, I would see her lying on the floor there right next to the bookshelf again. The most frightening night was when I awoke to see her lying there in an unusual spot, accompanied by some unnatural noises and a fatigued breathing sound I will never forget. It was as if she was trying to breathe with liquid iron in her lungs. I never screamed so hard and cried at the same time in my life. My mother said I was being ridiculous the entire time, but my brother saw the sincerity in my eyes. So fast forward when I'm older and we're moving house. My mom gets a local surveyor to come to the property. Anyway, he came up to my room while I was boxing up and started chatting. I then joked about how I would see that lady and sometimes the cat near the bookshelf. He then joked, "Oh, you do realize there's a fireplace built in the wall where your bookcase is, right?" I said, "Okay, and?" He looked at me a bit dumbfounded for a bit and changed the subject. I then asked why he mentioned the fireplace, and he stopped. He told me not to be alarmed and not to take it to heart, and even said he doesn't believe in ghosts or anything, but continued that in the late 1800s, someone in the house on the street had locked up a relative. Very vague on this part, because I can't quite remember the conversation due to the sheer fright and fear going through me at that time, but in their room, this is what happened, left them to starve after they went mad. Allegedly, the woman lit the fire and died from smoke inhalation. Apparently, someone in a wheelchair had died in the house prior to us moving in as well. I have no clue if any of that was true. I could only find a few references in local papers from archives about obituaries in the area, but nothing about causes of death. But it's just always been in my head, and coming on this thread really brought it back up. Dreamt of a boy I had never met, and then saw him on a missing poster the next day. So I was driving up north with my mom to visit grandparents. It's a 2-day trip, so we stop in a motel. Nothing was out of the ordinary, and the motel was pretty nice for such a remote area. Went to sleep and dreamed I was at my grandparents' house, and that it was haunted. Before this, I had recurring dreams where one specific room of their house was haunted. I had never dreamt of an entity in particular. I just saw things move on their own and had blankets ripped off me and heard unintelligible whispering until I woke up. This dream was different. It was the same room, and it started off just as terrifying as the others. Then I discovered that the entity was a teenage boy who had been murdered. I'm a teenage girl, and we sat in the room and spoke just like any two teenagers would. At one point in the dream, I went down to get a drink, and when I came back in the room, the door slammed behind me. I jumped and screamed a little, but he was standing in front of the door laughing. I told him to cut it out. It was just so normal, like I was talking to a friend from school or something. But I had never seen this kid before in my life. By the end of the dream, we were quite familiar with each other, and he confided how lonely he had been since he had died. how he missed his friends and worried about them. Now he couldn't tell them what happened to him or what death was like. I did my best to comfort him and asked if he could show me where he died. I said okay. He touched my head and I saw him laying in a pile of trash or recycling, blood on his face and blood accumulating around his head. His clothes dirty and his eyes blank. It only lasted a couple of seconds, so when I came to, I just looked at him and didn't say anything. Took his hand in mine and we just sat there in the bed looking at ourselves in the old vanity mirror. Then I woke up. I got a lot of weird and vivid dreams, so I wasn't on edge when I woke up. I just didn't even mention it to my mom. We got back on the road and I started playing video games again. Then we pulled into a rest stop in the middle of the forest. At this point, we were pretty far from the town that we had slept in, and the next town was where my grandparents lived. The only other people who lived around there lived in Indian reserves, and you couldn't hide a person there. Way too small. Get out of the car to stretch my legs, and while I'm walking to the bathroom, I see a couple of missing posters taped to a trash bin. And there he is. Roughly the same age, same hair, same clothes, same fucking name. When we get back into the car, I told my mom, and she believed me. Yet wasn't surprised in the slightest. She had always believed strongly in the paranormal, and had told me lots of stories from her life. Once her house had been robbed when she was a young girl, and as soon as she walked in, she went upstairs straight to where the robber had left his watch. My mom also does this thing where every month or so she'll stop whatever we're doing, cover her eyes and her hands, and tell me she dreamt the moment we're in right now. She told me in the car that every woman in her family had a strange thing like this happen, and it usually comes in like teenagerhood. I don't know if I really believe her. I mean, I believe what's happened to her and my grandma and all my aunts, but I don't know. I don't think it would actually happen to me. I've recently asked her about a dream I had when I was around 3 or 4, and she told me it wasn't a dream, that it actually happened. Then I asked my sister separately, and she told me the same thing. Sitting on my sister's bed, and she was holding a stack of Go Fish cards face down, and I was guessing what they were, and every time I got it right before she flipped them over. My mom was sitting in a chair watching us. She was very calm, and that's why I thought it was a dream. Also, you know, that shit's impossible, but considering what my mom said, it makes sense she wouldn't be surprised. My childhood home. My parents bought this house in the late 80s with one previous owner who bought it when it was new. I do not know of any deaths, murders, or issues with the property. It's like a 1,000-square-foot home with a basement. It's the size of the entire house. When you walk in the front door, you're in the living room and you can see directly into the kitchen. To the right of the entrance of the kitchen, there's a hallway that has 3 bedrooms and 1 small bathroom at the end. If you walk through the kitchen on the very back left side, there's a basement door. These details will help when trying to picture these stories. Story 1. When I was around 8 years old, our neighbor's daughter would watch us on occasion. We'll call her Kelly. She was 16 or 17 at the time. I have a younger brother who's 3 years younger than me. We're all in the living room playing hide and seek when we hear it's ringing coming from the basement. The ringing sounded like a phone. It was like one of those old phones that make a ton of noise and had a rotary dial. I asked my mom, and she said later that we didn't own one. There's definitely not a phone in the basement, so I hear this ringing and Kelly decides to go check and see what it is. She goes back, opens the basement door, and it stops completely. She brushes it off and comes back. About 30 minutes later, we hear the ringing again. We listened to it for 5 minutes or so to make sure we weren't nuts. She went to the basement door, again, bless her, and it stopped as soon as she opened the door. She started to panic a little but tried to play it off to not scare us. It started ringing again after like 20 minutes and lasted for about 10 because she didn't go back to the door to see what it was. Story 2. I was in my bedroom playing games late at night when I was like 14. I was the kid that stayed up all night during the summer and slept all day. It was probably 4 a.m. or so. Decided I was thirsty. Went into the kitchen for some water. It was pitch black because I didn't want to wake my family. Our bedrooms are all grouped together. I go down the hallway and make the right into the kitchen, and all of a sudden I smell this strong baby powder smell. It was like someone had dumped it on me. Paused for a second to be sure I wasn't imagining it. I then took a step back and couldn't smell it at all. I then took the step forward again, and the smell hit me so hard it scared me to death. The next morning I asked my mom if anybody had ever smelled like baby powder. She said my great-grandmother always smelled like it. Her words. Like she had poured it on herself every morning. Really freaky. Story 3. This one was the most intense of all experiences I have ever had. I was a little older, 17 or so this time. I was alone at home, and some background info. We had an air hockey table that had a broken on-off switch, so in order to use it, you had to plug it in manually every time. My mom was very particular about the air hockey table looking neat when we were done, so we put all the pucks on the end neatly. There's a vent in the bathroom that leads directly to the basement, so you can hear everything. Anyways, I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth when I hear the clack, clack, clack of the pucks hitting the side of the table and the air running on it. It was pretty loud when it was on, and I was like, huh? Went to the basement door to look down, and you could see directly to the table from the top of the steps, and it was on, plugged in, and pucks were all over the place. Called out to my brother, who didn't answer because I was alone, thinking maybe he came home early. No response. Thought maybe he left it on and went downstairs to fix it. Well, I unplugged it, wrapped the cord around the leg, and placed the pucks back because my mom would have been upset. I go back upstairs and mind my own business for like an hour when I have to use the restroom. Go in there, sit, hear the table going through the vent again. I could hear clearly that the pucks were moving. I will never forget that. Now I'm pretty freaked. Slink back to the basement door and open it, flip the light on, and the table's plugged in and running. Everything's out of place again. Bro, I go down again. Stupid, what's wrong with me? And I fix it all. Come back up, go to my room for like 10 minutes, go to use the bathroom and see if I could hear it, and it's going again. Did not go back there until the next day. Got in trouble for leaving it on all night, too. Three restaurant sightings I've been a part of. I had something like that happen once. I was working in a restaurant that specialized in noodles, and I was on lunch. We had just finished lunch rush and had just gotten everything ready for dinner. It's like 2:30 p.m. and I was sitting at the bar, facing the front, eating lunch. Cook came over and sat with me. About 10 minutes later, as both of us were sitting there, my boss comes running from the back of the restaurant out of where we were eating. She went through the dining room and then came over to the cook and I. She asks where all the customers are at. Both looked at each other and said, "No one's been in for 20 minutes. She then says to us, "I was working at the desk and looked out the window, but I noticed a customer standing in front of the register. Figured you took care of them, but looked back at the screen 5 minutes later and the customer is still standing there. That is when I came out to look for the customer and just ream you two out, but the customer's gone." We once again told her no one's been in for 20 minutes. We would also get customers reporting they saw a small child out of the corner of their eye and would run into the ladies' room unsupervised. The customer would then get up and go look for the kid, and the kid was never there. This happened at least twice a week at all different times. Last one. Sorry for such a long post. The street in front of the restaurant was getting revamped at night. Repaved, excuse me. So there was a construction crew outside from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. After about a week of construction, a crew member came to the restaurant to ask what our hours are. I told him 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. Sunday to Thursday and 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Friday and Saturday night. He said that's what I thought. But do you have people at like 2 a.m.? I said we shouldn't. He was sure he noticed them twice last week. I asked the gentleman if he could wait for 5 minutes as I went back to check the security tape. Lo and behold, no one's on the tape at 2 a.m. Showed the gentleman the tape after he watched it. He threw the sign of a cross and ran out of the restaurant. Sorry guys, I'm super tired. I used to think all pets could see spirits, but I found out last weekend that I was wrong. I'm sensitive to spirits and can often see them. It scares me when they're around, even though much of the time they're just hanging out. I've had some experiences that have gone further than that. We own a house that was built in 1865 that was a church parsonage. We have 2 spirits that live here. A young woman with long dark hair and a white gown that we often forget is here. I actually haven't seen her for years, though my daughter's seen her often. The other spirit is not a nice one. He lives in my computer room. He won't allow anyone to sleep in that room. On occasions I've tried, and he'll either nudge me awake every half hour or he'll induce nightmares. One time he appeared to me with a very angry, twisted face and screamed, "Get out!" There was one night that frightened me so bad I haven't tried to even nap in that room since. I was sleeping and the spirit grabbed what I can only assume was my soul, shoved me into the corner of the room. He started applying pressure to every part of my body. I was struggling to breathe or speak. Every time I tried to say something, he'd apply more pressure. It was really starting to hurt. As I struggled against him, he applied more pressure, and I pictured my mother. Wanted to call out to her no matter how much effort it took. I opened my mouth and I managed to squeak out, "Grandma." That wasn't what I wanted to say, but it's what came out. The moment I said the last syllable, I was wide awake on the bed, gasping for breath. My lungs and body hurting. I left the room and didn't go back in there. I believe my grandmother, who died 8 years ago, saved me. I know some may say I was sleeping or having a nightmare or sleep paralysis or whatever, but I know otherwise because of the other experiences that I've had with this spirit. I've seen him several times when I've been wide awake and just working on my computer. Even my children have seen him. This isn't what this thread is about, though. I used to think all pets, especially cats, could see spirits. This past weekend, I learned only of my 5 cats can see them. Only one of them, and his name is Marley. I work night shift, and he's often in the living room with me. Sometimes he'll stop whatever he's doing to stare intently at something. Sometimes it's a bug. I can tell because his eyes will dart all over the place. But when he stares at one spot without moving, I know it's a spirit. I typically don't worry about it too much, and I don't open up my awareness to them because I don't want to know that they're really there. But this past weekend was one that freaked me out because my cat was scared. He was doing that staring thing, but his tail was puffed up 4 times its normal size. Thought he was looking at a moving paper or something in my husband's computer room, so I closed the door. My cat didn't stop, and he was still staring at the same spot in front of my husband's computer room. I shared videos of it with a friend who told me to pick him up and bring him to where he was looking. When I tried that, the cat hissed and clawed me to get down. That was very out of character for him. He continued to stare in that one spot. Then whatever he was looking at must have moved down the hall. I wanted to know what was there, so I shielded myself and reached out for my awareness, and I saw a tall, pale man in a black trench coat standing in front of the entrance of our home at the end of the hall, unmoving and just watching me. Half of me thinks it's my imagination, but the other half knows better. My friend told me I should ask him to leave. I just wanted to leave it alone and let it be on its way in its own time, but my cat was becoming increasingly agitated, tail puffed up and now the fur on his back standing up. He kept staring at it. I decided, fine, I'll ask it to leave. Feeling silly because I didn't really believe that there was a spirit there. So I made a big show of telling it that it doesn't belong here and this is my home and he needs to leave. I was walking down the hall as I said that, practically laughing at myself for being so silly. When I got to the final part about him needing to leave, I reached the spot where I saw that he was standing and pointed out the door. It felt like I walked into a cold cloud. I heard a buzzing noise in my ears, pressure on my head, and static electricity that caused the hair all along my neck and back of it to stand up. Very freaky feeling. Then I saw this spirit turn into a black cloud and go out the door. Almost immediately, my cat calmed down. He glanced at that spot a couple of times at first, but he was more interested in being pet, playing with a box, or just laying down for a nap. I knew the spirit was gone. I had at least 2 other cats and my chihuahua in the room, and none of them reacted to the spirit or gave any indication of seeing it. So much for taking comfort in my pets alerting me when something's around. Well, I shared this story with my mom and husband the next day. My 16-year-old daughter got really excited and said, "You finally saw him. I've been seeing him on and off since I was 9. That's when I recalled my daughter wanting to sleep with the light on and wanting to sleep with us because she was seeing this spirit standing in her room, watching her sleep. Long-distance night flight. I had a very strange dream one night when I was living in Colorado. In the dream, I was sitting on my bed home in Guam. I was humming and reading a book to myself, something I do almost every day. After a few minutes, I decided that I wanted to go to my parents' room. Got off the bed, walked across the end of the hallway with heavy footsteps to my parents' bedroom door. As usual, the door was closed. I wrapped my right hand around the door and tried to turn it. It was locked. For some reason, I really wanted to enter their room. I turned the doorknob back and forth, but it wouldn't budge. My stubborn dream self was not accepting that door was locked. Placed my left hand over my right hand and shook the door with all my strength. It still didn't open. Gave up after a few seconds, released my tight grip from the doorknob, and clumsily walked down the hallway toward the kitchen. I don't remember ever reaching the kitchen before waking up. I looked at my alarm clock and it was 5 a.m. and I went back to sleep. I was on the phone with my parents the following evening, Colorado time. They told me about a strange experience that they had the night before in Guam time. They were watching TV. The air conditioner was on in their bedroom, so they made sure to close the door. My mom quickly muted the TV as she heard a strange noise coming from my bedroom. My parents are empty nesters, so there should not be anyone in the house but them. Then they heard heavy footsteps walk out of my bedroom across the hallway and toward their door. The doorknob began to slowly turn on its own. There was a brief pause before it turned again, a few more times. All of a sudden, the door began to shake violently. The shaking ceased after several seconds. The heavy footsteps moved from the other side of their door down the hall and toward the kitchen. "When did this happen?" I asked as my heart began to race and my breath became shallow. "This was around 10 last night," my mom replied. 10 p.m. in Guam would have been 5 a.m. in Colorado. Not a ghost story, but definitely supernatural. For a span of 18 months from March 2012 to September 2013, I would experience a disturbing, reoccurring dream almost every night. I would either have this dream or no memorable dream at all. The brief event and surrounding ideals and details that the dream were always exactly the same without any variation. 7 years later, I can still recall this dream as if I had just awoken from it. In the dream, I'm sitting in the driver's seat of a vehicle, looking through the eyes of a tall driver. I know I'm not the driver because I look down and to the right and see myself sitting in the front passenger seat. We're talking and laughing. The conversation and laughter in the dream are muffled and distant, like voices underwater. Through the eyes of the driver, I look past myself in the passenger seat, through the passenger window, and see a mass approaching at high velocity. The color and shape of the mass are indeterminate, shifting and flowing like a spectrum of light and space that my mind can't comprehend. The mass is quickly becoming larger and larger. Suddenly and violently, the mass collides with the front passenger side of the vehicle. This immense kinetic energy surges through my body as if convulsions of a massive earthquake have been condensed into a single moment, encasing me and penetrating me. Glass implodes from multiple directions like a bomb. This barrier constructed for protection transforms into a sea of shrapnel, sending thousands of tiny sharp teeth to bite and tear and rip and stab at every inch of my skin. The metal frame of the vehicle begins to collapse and rotate, as if it's nothing more than paper to be crumbled and tossed away. The space around me is becoming smaller and whirling faster like the motion of an endless roller coaster. My eyes never close, and I never look away from the passenger seat. I see myself lurch forward as if I weigh less than air. My face collides with the dashboard, the airbag never deploys, and I wake up. For 18 months, I have this dream. For 18 months, I become more stressed and more anxious. I see the dream when I sleep. I see the dream when I'm awake. I could not be in the front passenger seat of any vehicle without feeling my blood pressure rise. It gets to the point where I'm even scared to fall asleep for fear of seeing the event of the dream. In September 2013, I have the dream for the last time. 1 day passes. 1 week passes. 1 month passes. I still don't have the dream. I don't even question this because I'm so happy to be able to sleep again and not feel fear any time I'm in a vehicle. I feel that long, strange, and terrible period is finally past me. 2 months later, on a beautiful day in November of 2013, I'm working at a visitor center in the National Wildlife Refuge where I had been employed for a little over 2 years. It's a slow day at work and not many people are coming into the building. The tropical beach is far more interesting than our display murals and informational plaques. I take advantage of the slowness and spend my time reading. Mid-morning arrives and I hear the chime at the front door ring as soft footsteps enter the visitor center. I look up from my book and see a young couple who seem to be in their early and mid-30s. I greet them, but they don't really notice me in the distance. I return my gaze to my book as their attention is drawn to one of our murals and plaques. Some time passes before I hear a soft feminine voice politely say, "Excuse me," from the opposite side of the counter. "Yes?" I respond and look up with a smile to meet the eyes of the young woman. But as soon as I face her, her expression very quickly changes from inquiry to shock. She immediately turns to walk away. Without saying another word, she walks from the counter to the wall about 5 meters away. Her husband, presumably sensing her discomfort, walks up and puts his arm around her shoulders, and they talk in whispers I can't hear. She's visibly upset about something. I think this is very strange at first, but ultimately it's none of my business. I look away from them so that way they don't feel judged or observed. Many minutes pass, and the woman returns to the counter. Her face is a bit puffy and her eyes are a little red. She takes a quick deep breath and proceeds to ask me about the free cave tours available to visitors of the refuge. Without hesitation, I begin to describe the tour. About 2 minutes pass and she breaks down into full tears. She's crying heavily as her husband rushes back to her side. "So sorry, was it something I said?" That's all I could think of to say at that moment. She wipes her face with the tissues I hand her before taking a breath and speaking again, and she apologizes. I reassure her that there's nothing to apologize for. What she shares with me is something that will stick with me for the rest of my life. She attended university in Australia and lived there for 10 years. In her decade there, her best friend, a woman who became her sister, looked and spoke exactly like me. She was my complete doppelganger. 2 months earlier, in September of 2013, her best friend was involved in a major car accident. Another driver had hit her friend's side of the vehicle, the airbag never deployed, and she died instantly. The airbag never deployed. My heart begins to race, and every ounce of air seems to be empty from my lungs. After some time and comfort from her husband, the woman asks if we can go on the cave tour. "Of course," I respond. We go on our tour and return to the visitor center over an hour later. The woman tells me of their plans for the rest of their trip. After a brief silence, she reaches out and gives me a deep hug. "Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye," she keeps repeating slowly in a soft, forlorn whisper as she holds me in a warm embrace. I'm not the hugging type of person, but I realize that it's not me she's reaching out for, so I let her stay there for as long as she needs, returning her hug. After a while, she lets go. She doesn't look at my face as she turns away and walks away, and the woman and her husband take each other's hand and walk out the door. I never saw them again.